Madolche have always been an interesting deck because thanks to Queen Tiaramisu being a non-targeting, non-destroying, card-eliminating machine, the deck is really never out of a duel until it's actually over. The problem with Madolche is going into Tiaramisu is really the only play that it has to defeat the meta, and it is difficult for the deck to maintain field control after a Tiaramisu play. Therefore, in my opinion, making a successful Madolche deck involves managing this general weakness of the deck, the ebb and flow of I'm putting Tiaramisu on the field, wrecking your field, then, oh, now it's your turn, you're going to wreck my field. So, what does my deck look like to try to maximize my success with Madolche? Puddingcess is the main deck boss monster, and probably the most controversial monster in the deck. As the only tribute monster, she is not easy to summon, and as a level 5, she is not involved in the summons of Tiaramisu. However, the good is that without a monster in the graveyard, she is the heaviest hitter of the main deck at 1800 or 2300 of the Chateau on the field, and when she attacks a monster, she can destroy anything on the field that can be targeted and destroyed via her effect, even if it involves attacking something bigger than her and her removal from the field via battle afterwards. Her summons is also helped by Madolche tutors, most notably Hootcake and Mewfeuille, not having level restrictions on what they can summon. Overall, I can see why some people elect not to run her, but I find her useful enough at one copy. Now it's time for the least fun pronunciation of the bunch. Xavier is the best attacking level 4, but the problem is its effect is kind of pathetic. It's not at all helpful for getting Tiaramisu on the field with any level of speed or consistency, and its attack points are so similar to the rest of the Madolche bunch that its you can only attack me effect is kind of irrelevant. Messengelato is definitely worth running due to its search effect, allowing you to run fewer copies of both Chateau and Ticket, for while both these cards are nice little luxury benefits, they're not deck critical. Messengelato's warrior status is also important for increasing Tiaramisu's summoning potential. Drawing this card is certainly not advisable, thus I run 2 copies to maximize the probability of not drawing it, while still making sure I have a copy in my deck when I need to pull it out of the deck. The usefulness of Bottomless is diminished by 2 major factors. The fact that Chateau is not deck critical, thus getting it is nice but not game breaking, which limits the need to put it into your hand. Second, the requirement of an additional Madolche monster for the activation of the effect, also requiring you to normal summon Butler Rusk, puts a lot more unnecessary inefficiency into the effect. The effect is just too inconsistent and not useful enough to warrant running this card. And in a lot of respects, Messengelato does a better job of getting you what you need. In the market of Madolche monsters with normal summons effects, Magileine is far better than Butler Rusk because of its normal or flip summons nets you a +1 in the form of a Madolche monster. More than likely this is going to be Anjelly or Mewfeuille to set up a nice combo string. Also, being a level 4 Madolche monster is of course beneficial in and of itself to get the queen on the field. 3 copies. Anjelly will commonly be the jumping off point for most open field Madolche combinations by filling 2 critical roles. 1, summoning Hootcake from the deck, and 2, giving Hootcake its cost to fuel Hootcake's effect. While the monster summoned by its tribute effect will commonly be used for an XZ summon, it is important to remember that the summoned monster cannot be destroyed as a result of battle as long as it's on the field. Now, this will only be through your opponent's next turn, because then it will be returned to the deck on your next turn, but still, if you can't make a complete play, that monster can provide some level of field control, especially against a deck like Cosmos. 3 copies. Marmalade's effect is too slow and lackluster to be worth anything in a Tiaramisu-centric Madolche deck. This card only really has value in a kind of a trap-centric build, which I don't really see having a high success potential in this current meta, or most metas in general. Croupissant is rather worthless because the common Madolche tutors do not have level restrictions. Now, if Hootcakes or Mewfeuille said level 3 or lower, then this card might have some value. Fortunately, though, for Madolche players, they don't have a level restriction, so we don't need to run bad cards like this, and we only need to run cards like Hootcake and Mewfeuille. Hootcake fills 2 incredibly critical roles in this deck. The ability to grab what is necessary from the deck to continue your combinations. Most of the time, that's going to be a level 4. Most of the time, it's going to be Messengelato to get your free +1, plus set up a future queen. 2, it clears out your graveyard so other Madolche effects can trigger. 3 copies are a must. Chocolat has a limited effect with a somewhat difficult to trigger condition and generally weak stats. The problem with this card is that Tiramisu puts its effect to complete shame. Mewfeuille is definitely a quality card because sometimes Madolche need that extra monster to finish its combo string and put the queen on the field, and Mewfeuille is one of the prime candidates to get it on the field. Don't worry about the bad stats because this card is almost never going to stay on the field. Instead, it's almost always going to be used in the next Z-summon. 2 copies. Bapple is supposed to be a major combo trigger with Chocolates, I think, but as previously stated, the combination is just weak and insubstantial. Just skip it. Chocolat-a-la-Mode is definitely a nice card, but it does have a small problem. Madolche monsters tend not to stay in the graveyard, so sometimes, especially after ranking up from a Tiramisu, which is, for this particular deck build, the only way to summon a-la-mode, will leave you lacking fuel for its effect. Also, if you don't have Puddingness as a XZ material, a-la-mode's effect really almost becomes kind of a quasi just beatdown monster in a sense, unless you have both Chateau and Ticket on the field as well. However, even with that said, a-la-mode is still that big bruiser and can do some significant damage. I like running 1 copy. There really is nothing that needs to be said about the Queen. She's one of the top cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And probably will always be near the top. She eliminates 2 cards from the field without targeting or destroying, where returning to the deck is the most effective means of removal. A 2700 hitter with Chateau on the field, which will almost always be on the field when you bring her out. She can hold her own somewhat on the field, meaning your opponent, after you've returned 2 cards on their field to their deck, need to have available resources to make somewhat of a play, or she'll just hit them next turn. Queen is basically the preemptive salvo before the Madolche Bum Rush. I only run 2 copies because most of the time the second one can commonly return the first one from the graveyard to the extra deck during the course of utilizing its effect. Both Ticket and Chateau work amazingly well in consort together, but are not deck critical. Chateau provides a nice attack boost that allows Madolche monsters to actually get over other monsters without needing help from the Queen. Chateau also helps aid hand size and can allow for some more risky variants involving discards if one chooses to go that direction. Ticket helps maintain field presence, making the deck a pain in the neck to get over as long as these 2 cards are on the field together. However, Ticket is heavily diminished in its usefulness without Chateau. Overall value of both cards. Thankfully, Messengelato's searching effect helps speed access to both. I run 2 copies of Chateau and 1 copy of Ticket. I'm not a fan of any of the Madolche trap cards in this build. Lesson is alright, but it's a little too slow and inconsistent for my taste. Also, it's not necessary most of the time, largely because Queen is so brutal. Palooza can be nice at 1 copy due to those moments when Chateau and Ticket have added 2 to 3 Madolche monsters to your hand, and your hand is flush with 4 to 6 monsters. However, outside of this combination, Palooza is too slow and inconsistent for my taste, and typically when you're starting to get those types of bonuses into your hand, you're usually you've either broken even or you're winning. Overall, though, one of the main problems for Palooza is it's not searchable from the deck, which heavily mars its consistency. The damage from Waltz is far too meager to be worth it, and while T-Break and Knights are nice counter traps with those extra bonus potentials if Puddingcess is on the field, outside of the first 2 turns, their usefulness in my opinion tends to plummet because of their no monsters in the graveyard condition. Again, this is another card that seems to suffer due to lack of searchability. For the non-Madolche monsters, I run 2 nice cards that serve to manage what I feel to be the general weaknesses to this deck. First, I run 3 copies of Battle Fader, for there are times when Madolche need to set up, especially for Queen, and Fader gives you that additional stall turn that lets you set up for that combination that you need. Also, because Tiramisu can remove almost any threat, stalling behind Faders really doesn't produce any meaningful negative. Finally, I run 2 copies of a seemingly long-forgotten silver bullet for decks that need that extra firepower, like Madolche, Injection Fairy Lily. The ability of Lily to become a 3400 attack point monster heavily limits the attack point liability of Madolche monsters by allowing the clearance of almost any threat from the field. This is especially helpful in the Monarch matchup because if Domain's on the field, you won't have access to the Queen. For the spells, I run my 2 common staples in 1 Raigeki and 1 Soul Charge. Also, 3 copies of Twin Twister that can help prime the graveyard for Hootcake and Tiaramisu, as well as eliminate back row threats and stun cards. I said running Mewfeuille was important due to its additional monster on the field effect. Well, I also run 3 copies of Double Summon to supplement that strategy. Some might argue that 3 copies is too much, it can clog the hand, which is certainly true, but it's a strategy that has worked out for me as getting that second monster outside of the Hootcake combination is critically important. Finally, I run 2 copies of Creature Swap to deal with key powerful monsters when Tiaramisu is not available, and 1 copy of One Day of Peace because, again, Tiaramisu almost never cares about what the opponent puts on the field, so that extra draw is irrelevant, and those 2 extra draws you get, the one off One Day of Peace and the one off your next draw phase, because you're not losing during your opponent's turn when under 1 day, is essential to setting up your combination. For the traps, I run my 4 most common generic trap cards, 1 Torrential, 1 Bottomless Trap Hole, 1 Solemn Warning, and 1 Vanity's Emptiness. Finally, because I believe in the necessary stall aspect of this deck, because while OTKing with this deck is possible, it's not very likely, I run 3 copies of Waboku. I like Waboku over the cards like members of the Mirror Force family or even something like Solemn Strike, because Waboku is chainable protection. Again, Tiaramisu really doesn't care what's on the field when you put her on the field, so removing cards for your opponents to put on the field via Solemn Strikes or various Mirror Force variants is really not necessary. In addition to the Madolche monsters, I also run the following cards in my extra deck: 1 Castel, 1 number 101, 1 XZ Dragon, 1 number 106 Giant Hand, number 39 Utopia, Utopia the Lightning, 1 Gagaga Cowboy, 1 number 47 Nightmare Shark. This works really well in combination with Hootcakes later in the game. 1 Super Quantum Mecha Beast Granpulse, 2 Leviair the Sea Dragon, and 1 MX Saber Invoker. In the end, I feel the best way to play Madolche is with a counterattack mentality. Basically, play defensively using cards like Battle Fader and Waboku, and then counterattack using the Queen, because so few cards can neutralize her assault. Outside of the Queen, Madolche do have trouble with field control due to the general non-anti-anything or lack of floatiness in any of their other monsters, so more aggressive strategies do not appear to be a good way to play, and hasn't been in my experience. Fortunately, Madolches do have enough searching and return tricks that getting a Queen on the field every turn outside of the first turn, and sometimes they can do it on the first turn, is rather commonplace. Thus, they are always a counterattacking threat. Well, that's my Madolche deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.